It has been a month since Donald Trump returned to the Oval Office. The White House marked the milestone yesterday in an unusual manner. In an online post, it depicted Trump as a wannabe king for signing an order abolishing New York City's congestion tax. He has also repeatedly said he wants to abolish Canadian sovereignty and make it the 51st state. His remarks have stoked an outcry and wave of patriotism among proud Canadians. But internationally, the silence has been deafening. Allies in the G7 and NATO have declined to speak up on the issue, leaving many here to wonder whether those countries are in fact true friends standing up for Canada. So for more on this now and to further this discussion, we reached Fabrice Pothier. He's a former director of policy and planning at NATO, and he's now CEO of the political consultancy firm Rasmussen Global. Thank you for joining us.
Pleasure.
Okay, so in today's climate of President Donald Trump's threats that we've discussed to this country, his constant remarks, some might call jokes, claiming that Canada should become the 51st state of America, why has there not been wide and loud condemnation from Canadian allies?
Well, I think you have a point here, and it's a bit the same we observed for Denmark with the issue of Greenland, where you have not seen a big solidarity push from neither NATO nor the European Union. I think it's not for the lack of solidarity. It's probably an attempt to de-escalate, or at least not to further escalate into a rhetorical fight with Donald Trump. And as we have seen lately in a really, I think, very sad spectacle, this response of Donald Trump to President Zelensky's declaration was actually exactly what I think some NATO leaders are trying to avoid.
And it's an interesting strategy, particularly because when we want to talk about NATO, the alliance, we know that there was a lot of attention for Article 5 when we were talking about Russia's invasion of Ukraine, but we can also talk about Article 4. And Article 4 commits NATO members to consult together whenever, in the opinion of any member, that the territorial integrity, political independence, or security of a single nation or party is threatened. So given that, I guess the question is whether or not Trump's threats are being received on NATO's stage as such.
Well, first, I'm not sure Ottawa wanted or has tried to trigger Article 4, because that it is Article 4, Article 5. Obviously, it's an ally or a group of allies who have to say this is an Article 4 situation, like we had with Turkey several times during the Syria war. That's one thing. Second, I think we're all stunned, let's be honest, because here what you are looking at is one of our closest allies, one of the most fundamental allies, the United States of America, is turning against its own allies. I think we have come around the notion that they are adversaries in this big world, especially China, Russia, and others. But it is new, and it is quite shocking that the one power that has been historically the most dependable one, the United States of America, is not becoming, in a way, an adversary, or its interest, or the way its president is conveying its interest is clashing with our own interest and quite core interest. So I think it's also about adjustment to a very raw reality that Donald Trump is bringing to global politics. And you can see in Europe, it's the same. I was in Munich last week, and you could see the silence and the shock of the European leaders listening to the US vice president, looking at how the Americans were handling the negotiations with Russia. I think this is a new reality, and it's time to take stock. And I think Canada should become more European, and Europe should become more Canadian. And we should form, in a way, now a new geometry, a new coalition of the like-minded, willing to stand up against the bullies. And if the bully is down south for Canada, we should stand by Canada.
And that might be a conversation, perhaps, that could be happening behind closed doors. You know, we're using words like the shock that some may have received, the words of the U.S. Vice President at the Munich Security Council, de-escalation as well. We know that the United States is a mighty economic power, a mighty military power as well. There's the threat of tariffs on not only Canada, but on many other countries, including Europe as well. So our country's just scared.
They're scared, but they're not without leverage. I think that's very important to rebuild a sense of our own leverage. And you probably know more than me, but it looks like Donald Trump walking back on the threat of tariff on Canada and Mexico was because actually some people started realizing that there was such a dependence on the Canadian automotive industrial base to produce American cars that it was actually, there were queues at the border. And that's not politically and economically sustainable for the United States. So I think it's important to stand by our leverage. It's the same with Europe on Ukraine. We are the key to the sanctions on Russia. American sanctions on Russia are much less potent than European sanctions on Russia for the simple fact that the Russian economy is more dependent on the European economy. We hold most of the Russian frozen assets in Europe, not in the United States. And the current administration in Washington wants us to take care of Ukraine through the European Union integration process. These are three important points of leverage to say, hey, we hold three cards here, which you need in order to do a good deal with Russia and Ukraine to bring peace. So let's bring us to the table and let's talk. And the same should apply to Canada.
In the final 30 seconds I have with you, I just want to circle back to one point that you mentioned, and that was perhaps Europe should become more Canadian, Canada should become more European, and whether or not we're seeing the shaping of potentially a new alliance to that. Is that a possibility? Are we looking at a massive shift in the world order?
A week ago, you would have asked me this question, and I would have said, this remains a pretty remote possibility. NATO remains central to stability in the Northern Hemisphere. A week later, and many things have happened, and not the best, I can tell you that I think we are looking now at new geometries. There will be a new geometry in Europe going beyond the European Union simply because there are some European Union members who are not aligned with the others. And also some are outside the EU, like Norway and the UK, which we need if you want to have a credible European defense. And the same thing with Canada, especially in the high north. So I think there are going to be new geometries. It's going to be difficult. It's going to be uncertain. But the key here is that our leaders wake up and start to make decisions.
I want to thank you very much for your thoughts and your time today. Thank you, Fabrice.
Pleasure.
That was Fabrice Pothier, a former Director of Policy and Planning at NATO. Thank you.